Let's bring in two Fil-Am community organizers who are very active in the U.S. presidential campaign from both sides. We have Gabriel Young, a Democrat and Secretary of the Filipino Young Professionals, and John Jose, a Republican and founder and CEO of the American Tomorrow Project. Magandang umaga sa inyo. Tama ba? Umaga. Good morning.
Morning, early morning, yes.
Magandang umaga din
Hi,
po.
Gabe and John.
John, Gabe, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having us on.
Okay. Well, the numbers are the numbers are already up on the board. But let me start off with this. Maybe Gabe, seeing the numbers how they are right now. Of course, it's not yet final, but how is it from your end? What are you looking? What are you looking at?
I'm going to respond and say, first and foremost, congrats to my good friend John Jose and the Republican Party for the red tsunami. It's not even a red wave. We Democrats love calling it a blue wave, but you know, this time around, what we're seeing is a red wave. Former President Donald Trump is now president-elect. Even though it's 267, all he needed was 3 votes, and as we know it, Alaska has always voted red. And so it is so easy to concede and, to be honest, and just congratulate the Republican Party for a race well won. And then additionally, in the Senate, it's 42-51. The Republicans have taken control of the Senate, and as right now for the House of Representatives and Congress, it's 173 to 192. And even for the governor races, a majority of America's governors now are Republicans. And so just across the board, what we're seeing is that it's a red tsunami, a red wave, and the Republicans have won and have just been really well organized. And so all I can say as a Democrat is that we have a lot to work on, and we have a lot of lessons. And while I still hold the truth that, again, I still possess the same concerns as any other Democrat in this country would have, that made the messaging about it's the fight for American democracy and integrity, because we still uphold those beliefs, that 39 counts of criminal charges and January 6th, and it's so hard for that to erase for our minds. But as we're trying to make sure that we are looking forward and charting a new path forward, we have to first practice what we preach, be civil and constructive, and say congratulations again.
But Gabe, let me ask you first, what happened there? The presidency, the Senate, the Congress, and the governors, what happened there as far as the Blues are concerned? What do you think are the lessons here?
What happened is the Democratic Party and the institution failed, and it failed miserably. And what I mean by that is tokenization, ignoring the issues that really matter to Americans and not meeting Americans where they're at, but instead pushing a narrative. And I'm going to start with that, for meeting Americans where they're at. And I'm not just talking about the different racial ethnic minorities, but as in previous segments where I was with John brought up great points. The economy is at the forefront. Immigration is at the forefront. Foreign policy is at the forefront. But the Democratic Party didn't necessarily address those topics well. Within inflation and the economy, all it said is inflation is a worldwide problem. We're at 2% up, and that's the lowest in the world. However, it doesn't address the current needs of what can the federal government do to address and make prices low immediately. With foreign policy, we're seeing wars in Ukraine and also in Gaza. And so unfortunately, a lot of young Democratic voters like myself, although I did vote, a lot of other Democratic voters ended up not voting as a show of resistance, and as a sort of repeat to 2016 when they didn't like Hillary Clinton, but they didn't like Donald Trump. They ended up not voting, or even voting third party, which hurt in the long run as well. And so all in all, the Democratic Party has failed. It's failed in representing its constituents, it's failed in representing its candidates, and overall it's failed in making sure that it is the party of the middle and working class. Whereas the Republican Party did a great job at coming off as that more authentic, boots on the ground type of party, and really pushing the populist narrative that is the popular sentiment amongst major constituencies across America. So again, the Democratic Party has a lot to work on, especially in breaking down the elitism that has built it up, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a future for us.
I was surprised, Gabe, with the exit polls. I was expecting that majority of Americans are discontented with the government. But I was surprised with three-fourths. Three-fourths in the exit polls are discontented with government. So that's huge. That's huge. So that might have cost you the election.
Yeah. Can you bring in John? John, well, first of all, congratulations.
Yeah.
But we heard a while ago.
Congratulations, John.
Yeah, we heard a while
Thank you.
ago Trump saying, it's also a time to heal and all that. So moving forward, what do you see moving forward?
Yeah, no, I'd love to talk about, and thank you all again for having us. Maraming salamat po sa inyo. This is a great platform to educate and showcase to our Filipino-American viewers and the folks back home of what it is happening here. I'd like to thank Gabe as well. It's been a great election cycle to chat with him and to discuss these points. He's a great young man that's going to be the future Democrats as well, so for the Filipino-Americans. So great to have us on. But in terms of the cycle and moving forward, we've got to acknowledge as well, Sir Arnold, I know you were surprised by that, exit poll results, but those are the top issues that we've been hammering in since the very beginning, that the political pundits and the pollsters have kind of ignored. These are the folks that are those low propensity voters that we've been targeting that felt left out by the Democratic Party. And that in part is part of the discontent that they have for the government, which is the administration of President Biden and Kamala Harris. And it also didn't help in the last week of the election that President Biden calls the supporters garbage. That really resonated when Kamala might have had the last week of momentum, but she just flipped it right back. And I think there's some discontent between the two camps there. And so we want to thank President Biden for that support in the last week. But in terms of moving forward, as you can see from President Trump's speech here, you're seeing a much more mature and a much more like President Trump. He's been there and he's admitted through all these podcasts in the beginning, he didn't really know what he was doing. He didn't know how to govern. Now that with experience of governing in a much more successful and much more organized and disciplined team that he's got, and as you can see, I'm very optimistic of what we can bring into the cycle. And you can see, like, for the first time Republican president I've heard that has won the popular vote as well. Think about that. 2016, 2020, that never happened for President Trump. So he's really conveyed his message to majority of Americans across the country to see these, sweeping votes across the swing states as well. So we're really optimistic. As you can see, he was ready to get back to work. It's not about celebrating, about winning. He's ready to fix this country again.
But John, what happened to his
Donald
claims
Trump
last
talked
night
about healing.
that there's massive cheating in Philadelphia? That was last night. So it was.
So there's
was
been
that
issues.
part of a tactic?
Sir, because each individual states have different voting laws and election laws. And if you would look at Bucks County and those surrounding areas, that did cause some concerns, not only for Republican voters, but also for Democratic voters. And now with the operation of the RNC that we previously didn't have to battle these legal lawsuits and to get ahead of them, we found ways into saying, hey, this is not right for the voters of Pennsylvania. When you've had about a year to fix your election laws and this is how you prepare for it and still have malfunctions, I'd have to blame the state and those local officials for not adhering those issues in the very beginning.
John, Donald Trump talked about healing. You think this is possible, considering that we are still waiting for his sentence on his conviction on the sexual offense? You think this is actually possible?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you would look at those cases, those are, a lot of pundits have talked about how those are irrelevant and how they've been set up to trip him up since the very beginning. These are the obstacles that he's been talking about, right? And so now, in terms of healing, he's focusing on fixing the problems of the country when it comes to the inflation and the economical stuff and sealing the southern border. I believe that is one of his top priorities in terms of doing that. So we'll see what he comes out with his transition plans. I know that, he's just been, it's not over yet. The certification is still going to happen. There's still races to be called in some parts of the country, in the states, or in the Senate and the House. So I'm looking forward to what they bring up towards the inauguration and the transition side. But I'm optimistic that when he comes up to the first few days of office, he's going to do what he said. And that's what he did in 2016 when he won as well.
But what happens to that case? Because we are expecting a sentencing. Can a president-elect, can a sitting president be sent to prison?
Or can he pardon himself?
No,
Yes,
no,
or
that's
can
not.
he pardon himself?
He still has that presidential immunity once you become president-elect, and so that's going to have to be a discussion that's going to be for the lawyers. And for us to do anything about it, it's more than anything than speculation.
But although that is an interesting question, I suppose the lawyers are going to have a field day with that question.
Yes.
I can see, I can see Gabe. Gabe, you were raising your hand.
Yeah,
Yes.
sort of as a response to that. For those who don't know, in the Philippines, another facet of this presidential immunity has came from the court case of U.S. v. Trump, and with that particular court case was talking about his actions during the January 6th insurrection, and if presidents, while sitting in office, can be tried or criminalized or be sued for actions that they've taken. However, and mind, the majority of the Supreme Court are justices appointed by President Trump. And I'm not alluding to that the Supreme Court is a political body in itself. That can be a separate argument, as John liked to put it. The lawyers can argue that. But more so that the Supreme Court decided that sitting presidents have presidential immunity. And particularly on the opposite ends, for the ones who are considered the more liberal justices, like Associate Justice Sotomayor, this creates a slippery slope fallacy in the future too, though, where a sitting president can order SEAL Team 6, for example, to assassinate a candidate. And not saying in the hypothetical that would happen, and I am sort of paraphrasing from the dissent, and for those who aren't familiar with the dissent, it's when a justice who isn't in the majority opinion provides their own 2 cents, and it's considered the minority opinion that doesn't get upheld in the law. This has provided the ability for President Trump to act and to be free of the previous criminal convictions that he was having because of that one particular ruling. So within any actions that he's taken in office, or whether in an action taken whenever he's moving out and about, because the Supreme Court didn't define what essentially is presidential actions, because it's not like once you go to bed, you're not president anymore, essentially. And so President Trump essentially has immunity from all cases, which, again, as us Democrats have, we really feared for the integrity of our democracy when a president who does have these convictions is elected. But then that goes to say, again, does that mean that every law that is created is good? Well, that is, again, something for lawyers and philosophers to decide. But at least for us at the ballots today, we've showed that no, that just because someone has a criminal conviction, it means that they can become president, even though it means that they can't get a job at McDonald's. For the record, criminal felons cannot get a job at McDonald's. Want to read that out there. So there's a huge dichotomy between these two examples that are being played out here.
John, one
Yes,
of
Bob.
the fundamentals of the American system, political system, is the system of checks and balance. But what will happen to that fundamental if the Republicans win Congress, win the Senate, and at least at present dominates the Supreme Court? So how will that play out, the system of checks and balance?
I mean, they're all separate individual things,
Yeah.
so they're not co-inspiring to do different things, right? I mean, the Supreme Court's its own individual body, so is the House and the Senate, and they have to organize. And the next steps is for the House to figure out their next set of leadership, and the same way for the Senate and how they're going to govern, right? But I do believe, I mean, that was the same way in terms of when Biden won in 2020 and had the trifecta as well. That gets him to fast forward his policies that he's been talking about and making sure those policies gets enacted right away. So in terms of getting things done, those are going to be the priorities of the next trifecta. Shall we keep the House? And of course, we flip the Senate and of course the White House now too. So there's going to be a different dichotomies of leadership between the three houses and the three bodies. If we keep the House, do we keep Speaker Johnson? More than likely, yes. And who's going to be the next leader of the Republican Senate as well? Are they going to be? Is the Senate body going to pick somebody that's more towards Trump, or is it going to be somewhat more of a moderate Republican that can kind of gather people of more like Mitch McConnell? Right. So those are the different things that they have to figure out first before they move forward. But to have the idea of all three bodies and the Supreme Court to be working against the Americans is, crazy. But I think it's going to help more in terms of working within the American system.
Mm-hmm. But John, I think to Ronald's point, Trump does seem to be a bit more on the adventurous side, at least by his policy declarations and his statements. So I suppose the question there would be, would the Republican Congress, both Senate and the House, be in a position to act as a check and balance just in case Trump does get more adventurous?
The people that's going to act on the check on balances now is going to be the minority. Just like the way when we were in the minority, we checked and balanced Joe Biden and his administration to the biggest the difference was then that the Senate was split, and that got Kamala Harris to be the deciding factor and the deciding vote in a lot of these policies. So in terms of the checks and balances, that's why you got the minority. I'm sure that minority speaker or minority leader Hakeem Jeffries is going to be on full speed ahead in terms of oversight when it comes to the next upcoming administration. They're going to find ways to be a thorn to the side of the admin, just like the way the Republicans did, and make a case for them in the midterms to take the House back or some of those Senate seats back, right? So that is the terms of in checks and balances, and those, I believe, in elections are the biggest checks and balances we have in this country. To
John, what can immigrants expect now? Immigrants to the U.S. and prospective immigrants, will President-elect Trump fully deliver on his campaign promise? It's a promise, right?
I believe that legal immigration is going to be something that he's going to push for even more now. He's always said he's never been against immigration. He just wants legal immigration. We want folks that are the best of the best, not somebody who are going to be the worst of the country that's going to be crossing over the border and find ways into the American people. American taxpayers are going to be the one that's going to be funding their bill. And so I think that's what was the crux of why the American people got really tired of this illegal immigration aspect, right? I don't think Americans are scared of immigrants or turned away from immigrants coming to the country. I think they're focused on legal immigration and not taking advantage of a border policy that's so loose that anybody can come in, and then the taxpayers are going to have to be footing up the bill when it comes to their welfare. So I think that's the biggest issue in terms of figuring out and making sure that those borders are closed. In terms of for Filipino Americans, I believe it's going to be a lot more strenuous in making sure that we have the right qualifications and the requirements to come to America, just as what Americans want to have a tighter border, right, and tighter policies to get the best of the different countries that come to the United States. In terms of our Filipino Americans, it's going to be an interesting thing on how he's going to roll out these policies. But when it comes to talk to mass deportation and all of those, the sentiment that he's always brought up was he's going to try to get rid of those most dangerous criminals in the very beginning that has abused the justice system and has committed tons of crime in American communities. That's the ones that he's going to get rid of in the beginning. And then how do you find ways into making sure that law and order is abided in terms of legal immigration? I'm sure that that's going to be coming down the pipeline as well. But I believe that the House, the Senate, they're going to give them the checks and balances of this upcoming administration as well. But that's the strength of the American democracy.
How about climate change, John? Because Donald Trump has been criticized as a climate change denier. Will that change when he is now president?
I think, he's been pushing forward lots of climate policies, and specifically into making sure that America stands on its own in terms of the energy independence, right? He's talking about drill, baby, drill, and making sure that we depend on us instead of different countries when it comes to our oil production, and making sure that it's safer for what we are in the country. So I'm expecting, like, during his presidency, he's reserved a lot of lands as well and make them federal lands. And so those are going to be policies. I'm going to be interested on who he puts in these cabinet spots, right? And that's a better way to kind of have a better internal analysis or a scope of what that administration or that agency might look like.
Gabe, you started by congratulating John over here. So I'm kind of also wondering if you've heard any news from your colleagues and from officials in the Democratic Party on what Kamala Harris plans to do. Is she preparing, for example, a concession speech already? In other words, has she conceded, whether officially or not officially?
So I can't speak upon my former colleagues and current colleagues in the Democratic Party in the Harris-Walz campaign, especially since I'm not over there in Wilmington, so really don't know what they're up to right now. But at least the short joke that I was texting with my friends is, hey, at least you finally got to go home. Please take care of yourself. Please get a good night's sleep. We were really up late watching it all the way till 3 a.m. And as much, again, it's comedic and laughing too. My friends haven't slept in the past 48 hours because it's really been that tight of a razor race. And so in terms of Vice President Harris and what speculation can we bring, as we heard tonight over at Howard University, Vice President Harris didn't come out and address the large crowd that was waiting for her. And a lot of what the commentary is coming from, correct me if I'm wrong, John, with my presidential history, but there hasn't been a presidential candidate in a very long time, whether victorious or defeated, that didn't address their in-person supporters on election night. And for me, it is such a stark contrast because there was so much hope and joy attached to the election. And now all that hope and joy is quickly dissipating in a quick flash when we need it the most. And our leader is not showing, which is really portraying a really bad picture, in all honesty, onto us Democrats. And so in terms of how I am hoping and looking forward, I really hope that tomorrow morning or tomorrow afternoon or whenever Vice President Harris is ready, that she eventually addresses us as her supporters. And of course, similar to what happened over in 2000 with Al Gore and George Bush, encourage us to create a new way forward and to create a stronger civility, even though we didn't get what we wanted. I know President Biden tried that in 2020, but of course tensions were very high. And then even in 2016, because of the tensions between the nominee Clinton and of course President Trump. But I recall back into 2000 because it's one of the first times with the Supreme Court intervening and a lot of people losing their faith in the election process, that we had candidates who civilly shook hands and said and encouraged their supporters to accept the election. And so that is really my hope and how I'm hoping that a new constructive way forward through unity can really happen. And just wanting to make sure John and the Republican Party is being held accountable as well, that the Republican Party works towards that unity instead of the divisive language that we've heard before. A lot of the fears that we have, for example, is the fear of losing minority business development agencies or agencies focused on minority development, or even policies that are really protecting a lot of people of color. And so if the Republican Party is really calling for this sense of unity, then we hope to hold them accountable to that same sense through the checks and balances of the House, Senate, Judiciary, and eventually Executive.
Okay. I'd like to say maraming salamat sa inyong dalawa, Gabe Young and John Jose. Both young leaders from different sides of the political fence, but I understand also both very good friends, which is the way it should be. So maraming salamat sa inyong dalawa.
you.
And congratulations for peaceful
Maraming
elections.
salamat po.
Wish us luck because next year we will have our own elections here.
Can't wait.